I'm Tim Westerbeck, president of Eduvantis, a data-driven strategic consulting firm serving more than 150 of the world's top higher education institutions. Mauro Guillen, vice dean of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, joins the Business Education Revolution podcast. He's formerly dean of the Cambridge University Judge School of Business and is the best-selling author of 2030, How Today's Biggest Trends Will Collide and Reshape the Future of Everything, and also his latest book, The Perennials, the Megatrends Creating a Post-Generational Society. What's going to happen in 2030? Can you give me a 1 or 2 minute version of what's going to happen?
Well, what's going to happen is that several long-standing trends are going to reach like a critical level. And we're going to start feeling that the world feels very different than what it is today. So, for example, we're going to see that there will be, by 2030, more grandparents than grandchildren in the world. We're going to see also that women will be the biggest wealth holders, holding more wealth in the world than men. We're also going to see that Africa will become the second biggest region by population in the world, and that Europe, which used to be number 2 after World War II, will fall to 5th or 6th place. At the same time, by 2030, also we will see that India and the rest of South Asia will have leveled off in terms of its population growth.
Now, that doesn't seem very far off, but it sounds like significant change. Did this sneak up on us somehow?
Yeah, well, the thing is that we have seen these demographic shifts and economic shifts coming for a long time. But they really didn't reach critical levels. We haven't been approaching a turning point or a tipping point. And that's going to happen, however, by the year 2030.
Do you think that most people in the world understand how different the world might be just in that relatively short period of time?
Well, in my experience, I don't think most people realize how much the world is going to change over the next 6 or 7 years. Not even people who are supposedly very well informed, like CEOs or managers in general. So I think it is incumbent upon people like you and I to educate people so that they can get ready for those changes.
As your book has come out and as you have spoken about this subject, do you find people are skeptical, scared? How are they reacting to these radical ideas, radical changes?
I don't think they're skeptical. I think they realize that all of these transformations are coming. What they didn't realize was that all of them, from every possible angle, are going to coincide in that year. So demographic changes, economic changes, technological changes, and so on, geopolitical changes as well. So they had heard about each of these trends, they had been thinking about them, but they never realized that all of them were going to change at the same time.
How ready do you think the world is for this new reality, which again, it seems like it's almost upon us?
Yeah, it's imminent. I don't think we're ready. I don't think companies are ready. I don't think governments are ready. I think we're stumbling towards that kind of a situation in which we're going to see that the world suddenly will be very, very different than the world in which we were born.
Does that concern you in any way, that the world and the governments and our systems and such may not be ready for this?
Well, I'm of two minds, right? On the one hand, yes, I am worried, I'm concerned about it. On the other, I think we all need to realize that all of these transformations will create a lot of opportunities. So when I said that nobody is prepared for it, sure there are people or entrepreneurs or companies that are already thinking about those transformations. So I think what we're going to see is these massive differences between winners and losers. Companies or individuals who prepare themselves for all of these changes, they're going to be able to take advantage of the opportunities. And then a lot of other companies, a lot of other individuals who haven't really given that much thought to it. And therefore, they're not going to be able to take advantage of the big opportunities that are going to be emerging.
Does that create the potential, do you think, for disruption and conflict, even these sort of imbalances of understanding of how the world is operating?
Well, disruption for sure. And companies that perhaps today are very well established, they may run into trouble if they don't start preparing themselves. Conflict, I think, is avoidable. But again, if we have too many losers and only a few winners, there may be, a situation in which it's going to be very difficult to avoid conflict.
Bringing this down into sort of the management education environment, the context, is management education ready for this?
Well, I think, unfortunately, business schools were always behind the curve, or almost always behind the curve. You see, there are very few instances historically of situations in which what happened at a business school, something that was invented at the business school, has changed the world of practice. Normally what we're trying to do is play catch-up with events in the world, with innovations at companies, and so on and so forth. So I think, universities in general, business schools in particular, we are lagging behind a lot of these changes, and we have to wake up. And we don't wake up, I think the new competition from online platforms is going to make us wake up.
What do you think waking up looks like? Because from my view, and I'd welcome if you have a different view, most business schools aren't attuned to the kinds of issues and disruptions you're talking about.
I mean, look, it takes sometimes decades to change the curriculum because you have to bring everybody to the table, stakeholders, employers, alumni, students, faculty. It takes a big effort to revise the curriculum. But, the curriculum should be revised on an annual basis, not every 10 or 20 years, right? And then the other, I think, really important thing that is going on is that, we haven't changed our pedagogies. We haven't really changed that much the way we are teaching in the classroom or just in general teaching. And, of course, new generations of students, they're demanding a different learning, style, because they learn in a different way than other generations. So if I remember correctly, the last major innovation in business school teaching was the introduction of the PowerPoints. And before that, it was the slide projector. You remember what that device was. So since then, we haven't really engaged in anything major until the pandemic. Then the pandemic, forced everyone to innovate. And, it wasn't just online. It was also preparing materials for the students to watch before they came to class and so on and so forth. So I think the pandemic has accelerated innovation in terms of pedagogy at business schools, but I don't think it's nearly enough.
As a business educator, are you concerned about that?
Oh, of course, because I think we run the risk of losing students, potential students. If we don't change the way in which we give them opportunities for learning, if we don't innovate in terms of pedagogies, I think a lot of younger folks are going to be thinking business school is not for me.
It strikes me in reading your book and listening to you talk that there could be the evolution of some entirely new disciplines that might come from the changes that are happening in the world, new areas of study, of things that have never been studied before.
Oh, absolutely. So, for example, big data or analytics, very clearly. But it's not just that quantitative stuff. I mean, people think that everything that is changes has to do with technology and with numbers. As you know, the labor market now, American corporations are asking job applicants to have social skills. So the ability to negotiate, the ability to work in teams, the ability to cope with, situations in which emotional intelligence is really important. So all of those social skills, we also need to help people acquire them because we're not born with them necessarily.
Again, as a business educator yourself, are you optimistic that business schools will adapt to this new reality?
I'm always optimistic. And again, because there are opportunities out there, I think there will be some business schools that will adjust or adapt faster than others. And then the others will be forced because of competition to, also adjust. But more importantly, I think the new competitors getting into the field, especially online platforms, I think they're going to put so much pressure on the established institutions, meaning the business schools in this case, that those who don't want to change eventually will have to change or they will need to disappear. So I think competition will cure all of these problems, right? Because there are new entrants in the industry, in the education industry, business education industry, and they're coming in with new business models.
If you were to advise if there is such a thing, the average business school, what does it have to do to prepare for this, to be effective in this environment?
Well, I think decision-making needs to be a little bit nimbler and faster. Again, business schools normally make decisions by committee. So they appoint committees, and these committees work for months on a curriculum reform or this or that. So I think faster decision-making would be really, really important. And I also believe that making sure that the faculty and the administration of the business school are attuned to what's going on in the world is extremely important. You have to create mechanisms to help faculty be ahead of the curve as opposed to always following.
Are you yourself optimistic that the traditional business school will be able to adapt in time to remain relevant in this relatively short period of time?
I think we're going through a big disruption, as you know. Many second-tier business schools are shutting down their MBA programs, and they're moving online. They're trying to adapt to the new situation. And as I said, I think competition in the end will ensure that everybody at least tries to adjust to the new situation. But I think it is entirely possible that more and more business schools actually go out of business, so to speak, right, in the near future, especially under pressure from all of these other non-business school, non-university-like competitors, like online platforms, for example.
If you were right now talking to a hypothetical business school faculty at University X, what would you be saying to them in terms of what they need to do to be ready for this new era?
And just be open-minded. So, for example, never assume that online education or an online class is of lesser quality than a face-to-face one, because that's not the way, that's the way maybe the faculty member perceives it. But that's not the way the students, the learners necessarily perceive it. A lot of students prefer to take an online class. And something that we all found out during the pandemic, the more introverted students actually participate more online than in the classroom. So the online, delivery channel for business education is not a second best at all. I think it's just another format, and it can be as effective. And for some students, it can be better than the in-classroom teaching model.
What concerns you most about this entire situation we're talking about, the radical change, the changing demands on management education?
Well, I guess the biggest fear would be if AI completely makes human professors redundant, right? Which could happen because AI is making so much progress that in the end, it could well be that, they can give a better lecture than a professor and probably also answer questions more effectively. So I think that's a fear, obviously, that we all have, right? All workers have. And by the way, I think something really important here that I would like to add about pedagogy in the classroom and how to create an environment for the students, business students, to learn. I would also tell faculty, never ever prevent the students from using AI like ChatGPT. Because the moment they graduate, they're going to start using it. So you better prepare them for that. So whenever I hear from a faculty member who says, you cannot use ChatGPT for my class, or you cannot use ChatGPT for a paper that you need to write for my class, I think that is the silliest thing that you could do as a professor. Because as a professor, you're not supposed to teach them what's on the syllabus, right? That's a means to an end. The end is you're preparing your students for a career in business. And you tell me whether you are preparing students for a career in business if you're telling them don't use ChatGPT, because everybody's going to be using ChatGPT, no matter what.
If you were to take a vote among all business school faculty, hypothetically in the world, and you made that statement, what would be your guess as to what percentage would agree and those that would disagree?
Yeah, I would say that perhaps half of them would agree to a certain degree with me. The other half perhaps would be saying no. But, I think the two groups of faculty would have very different characteristics. I think younger faculty would probably agree more likely, or would be more likely to agree with me, and perhaps older faculty not as likely. And then faculty for certain disciplines might be more willing to agree. But what we all know is that the world of practice is being transformed by new technology, and especially by ChatGPT. And so to tell the students that while they're on the program, they cannot use ChatGPT is, as I said earlier, the silliest thing that you can ever do, right? It's like telling students you cannot use a calculator, you cannot use Excel, when they're going to be using it, right, once they graduate.
Given all this, what is your biggest fear or concern, both for universities that teach students, for prospective students and companies, governments? I mean, what's your biggest fear around all this?
Well, again, that people continue to believe that the assumptions that they were making in the past still hold when everything is changing. So, in other words, we need to change our mindset. I think the biggest problem, when organizations don't change, has to do with the mindset of the people making the decisions or the people working at that organization. So we need to change our mindset. Now, it's difficult to change your mindset when you've been thinking in a particular way for a very long time. But I think it's inevitable these days. You really have, it's unavoidable. You have to change your mindset.
Well, universities, this is a stereotype, I suppose, are not known for rapid change.
No.
And are you optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that we're going to get ourselves together, if you will, to make these changes?
Yeah, I am optimistic for two reasons. I mean, one is that of all units within a university, I think business schools, because they're so close to the world of practice, we do react a little bit faster than the rest of the university, right? And then the second reason why I'm optimistic is what I mentioned earlier, which is that I think competition is the cure for everything, right? Competition is a fact of life. We compete for food. We compete for attention since we are children. We compete for jobs. We compete for every resource that exists on the planet, right? Of course, what we want to do is to organize that competition in such a way that it results in the best possible outcomes, and also that it's fair, that not, we don't have people who always lose in that competition, right? But competition is a very important organizing principle of life. And I do believe that under competitive pressure, universities and business schools will change.
I've read your outstanding book, and that we've been talking about, 2030, we've been talking about. And my first thought after I put it down was, how many people in the management education environment really believe this, really understand and respect the fact that this is a scenario that's emerging in the relatively near term? What has been the response you've gotten from the management education community?
Well, I think they get it. They understand that all of these things are going on because they see it, right? I mean, they see that the students are changing. They see that, different parts of the world are becoming more important geopolitically or economically. They also understand that technology is changing everything. In fact, I would say that perhaps that's the trend that they know the best, right? Technological change. What I don't think they do is what I propose as the main message of the book, which is that you have to understand how all of these different things come together, how they interact with one another. You have to connect the dots. If you don't connect the dots across 10 trends, then you're going to miss the overall picture.
Well, even in 2030, there are things between now and then that could bring about significant changes from the vision that you've put forth. What do you think some of those things might be?
Between now and, let's say, the next, 2033, the next 10 years, things that could happen. Well, we could have a major geopolitical confrontation in the world, right? Like a really major one. I mean, we do have wars right now, which are obviously really problematic. New wars, as well as some older wars that we have already forgotten about, like the civil war in Syria or the civil war in Yemen, right? Now we have Ukraine, and we have the conflict between Hamas and Israel. But we could have a major geopolitical confrontation in the world. I think a lot of people believe that could well happen. We could have another pandemic. This is what the public health experts continue to remind us, that we have a vaccine, but we have a vaccine for this kind of a virus. But something different could evolve, right, and then spread throughout human populations in the world. I think we could also witness in the next 10 years a major technological breakthrough. What that might be, I don't know. If I knew, I would be, putting my money into the companies that are developing those technologies, and then I would be rich in 10 years' time. But there's so much money going into technology development, research and development. There's so much money going into ventures that are trying to, implement those technologies in a way that they are economically or from a business point of view useful in the market, that sooner or later I think we're going to see a major breakthrough. It could be in medicine, it could be in 3D printing, it could be in AI, it could be in robotics. I don't know, but there's so much money, so much effort is being put into all of those fields that I think something major may happen.
Now, your most recent book, The Perennials, is out. And could you tell us a little bit about how that might build on your prior book? For the longest time, for last 120 years or so, we have been living our lives in a way that is completely inconsistent with the new labor market. It's inconsistent with technological change. It's inconsistent with what companies are looking for in terms of their employees, their workers. So this model of life that emerged 120 years ago did so because there were two major innovations. The first innovation was universal schooling. And that essentially separated childhood from early, teenagehood and then early adulthood, right? So we went from just playing to being in school. And then the second big innovation was pension systems, which essentially meant that we didn't have to work all of our lives,
that we could retire at some point. And this model, which I call the sequential model, very linear, is completely inconsistent, incompatible with what we have today in the world. Most people in America, for example, they don't like their jobs. So even though they don't like their jobs, they're told, look, work for 20, 30, 40 years, try to save money, because even if you don't like your job, at the end of your work life, there is this big prize that awaits you, which is called retirement, right? And then you're really going to be able to enjoy life. Isn't that silly, right? I mean, that you have to wait until that late to enjoy life, right? And the model, I think, is especially breaking down among young people, because we're telling our kids that by age 16 or by age 18, they need to make up their minds. They need to decide, this is what I'm going to be in life for the rest of my life. That's an impossible task, especially when nobody has a clue, nor the parents, nor the children, nor the school counselors, as to what kinds of jobs are going to be available in the economy, not in 20 or 30 years from now, but in 5 or 10, right? So how can you ask young people to make up their minds so early when nobody knows what are the kinds of jobs or occupations or professions that are going to be in great demand in the future? So what happens? It's very simple. The rates of stress, the rates of mental illness, the rates of suicide among young people are through the roof. So this system is no longer working. It doesn't matter where you look, young people, middle-aged people, or people in retirement. It doesn't work for anybody.
Well, I want to thank you very much for the time you spent here and the great insights you've shared. I sure appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, Tim. Wonderful to talking to you.
You're welcome.